Hello, and welcome to our webinar, 4 Content Trends to Engage K through 12 Students in 2019. I'm Susan McGuire. Let me prove it. There I am. Booklist Senior Editor for Collection Management and Library Outreach. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. To resize the slides, look to the magnifying glass icons located to the left of the slides. There you can increase or decrease the size and select how you'd like the slides to appear. If you lose audio or would like to change the way you're connected to it, look at the bottom of your screen for a circle with 3 dots. Clicking that icon will open a menu with an audio connection option. If you experience any issues during the webinar, click on the FAQ webinars in the drop-down menu at the top of your WebEx screen to view a PDF with answers to commonly asked webinar questions. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the right side of your screen is a control panel with an area at the bottom for Q&A. Simply type your question into the field and click Send. Attendees can see questions asked during the webinar and the answers provided. Today's slides can be downloaded at any time by copying the URL on this screen into your web browser. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing a link to today's slide presentation, as well as a link to the Certificate of Completion. The titles covered in today's webinar can be found at the URL below and will be sent in the follow-up material you'll receive from Booklist. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Kristen Milks, Sarah Wilsman, and Liz Tausey. I'll start off by reading all 3 of their bios, and then we'll jump right into the webinar. Kristen Milks wishes she could get paid to sit at home and read. Girl. Seeing as that does not pay the bills, librarianship was a close second. After receiving her BA in English and French from Ohio University, Kristen went to Indiana University Bloomington for her MLS. She worked as an adult information services librarian at the Mentor Public Library before coming to OverDrive. Her reading tastes are eclectic, but if you insist on narrowing it down, she loves Harry Potter and Anne Shirley, memoirs, graphic novels or comics, cozy mysteries, and middle grade literature. Sarah Wilsman is a voracious reader, thanks to her grandmother, who managed an independent bookstore and supplied her with stacks of books. She got her BA in English at Kenyon College and her MLIS at Kent State University. Sarah worked at several public libraries and youth services for over a decade, where her favorite part of the job was selecting which books to purchase. She also reviewed Kids Lit for School Library Journal for years. At OverDrive, Sarah is a content specialist for the education team, where she loves helping school partners develop engaging digital collections for their students. Liz Tausey likes to tell people that she'll read pretty much anything if someone gives her a good recommendation, which is 99% true. She doubled up at Kent State University, where she received both her bachelor's in English literature and master's in library science, though several years apart from each other. She worked at academic libraries and in higher education in general prior to working at OverDrive. She currently heads the small but mighty international unit of the collection development team and works with schools across the globe. Welcome, Kristen, Sarah, and Liz. The floor is yours.
Okay, hi everyone. This is Sarah. I'm one of the content specialists and I work in the education department, so I work primarily with schools. I apologize for my Cleveland cold and hope that you can all understand me. The first content trend that we're going to discuss today is the Own Voices hashtag. It falls under the diversity and inclusion subject, and We Need Diverse Books has been around since 2014 when it was started by authors Ellen O. and Melinda Lowe in response to a lack of diversity in Kids Lit. Recently, the discussion about representation in Kids Lit has evolved into the Own Voices hashtag, which was started by author Corinne Dalvis to recommend Kids Lit about diverse characters that is written by authors from that same diverse group. So, to qualify as a hashtag Own Voices book, the title needs to have both a protagonist and an author who share the same marginalized identity. According to SLJ, 28% of characters in YA books represent people of color, but only 6% of the YA authors are people of color. So there is a disconnect there. While there are books that have diverse characters, the hashtag Own Voices titles add an extra degree of authority and authenticity to stories because the authors are writing from their own experience, which provides a deeper understanding of the shared identity. Here are a few Own Voices titles that we recommend adding to your collections. The first book that I want to talk about is my current favorite book. It's New Kid by Jerry Craft, and it's a mid-grade graphic novel. It's a must-read for both students and educators. New Kid, Jordan Banks, is an 11-year-old African-American student on financial aid at a private, largely white prep school in Manhattan. The graphic format allows the reader to appreciate the nuances of white privilege Jordan experiences at his new school from both the students and teachers. The author, Jerry Craft, is Own Voices because he grew up in Washington Heights, where Jordan lives, and founded an annual Black Comics Book Festival. Kirkus says that New Kid is an engrossing, humorous, and vitally important graphic novel that should be required reading in every middle school in America. And it says for ages 10 to 14. Genesis Begins Again is my other favorite book that's just come out. It's by Alicia D. Williams, and it's mid-grade fiction. Genesis is a 13-year-old African-American girl whose father is both an alcoholic and a compulsive gambler. His unemployment forces the family to be evicted from their home in front of her friends when he can't make the rent. The new house that they moved to after their latest eviction is in an upper middle-class suburb where Genesis struggles to fit in. Genesis is full of self-loathing for her dark skin and longs for her mother's lighter complexion. The novel is realistic, and every character has a backstory and a history, so the reader understands the character's reactions and motivations. It's upper mid-grade coming of age. It's getting lots of starred reviews from both SLJ and Kirkus, and I expect it to be a contender in the next awards cycle. Both Dreamers by Yuyi Morales and Front Desk by Kelly Yang were award winners at this year's YMAs, and Not Your Princess is a YA nonfiction collection of writing from Indigenous North American women that would be a good addition to any collection. And now I will hand it off to my colleague, Kristen.
Hi, everyone. The first book I want to touch on is This Time Will Be Different by Nisa Seguera. The author actually won the Asian Pacific American Award for YA Literature for her previous novel, It's Not Like It's a Secret. Her current novel that's coming out in June is another young adult novel, and it is about a 17-year-old Japanese-American girl named CJ. CJ works with her aunt at her aunt's flower shop, where she's learning the language of flowers and how to best provide a bouquet to a customer. But the shop isn't doing so well, and it's going to be sold. The family who happens to be buying it happens to be the same family who swindled CJ's family during the Japanese internment in World War II. So currently, CJ is dealing with how much the past should remain in her present. This is a really great book to discuss the Japanese internment and what America did to Japanese Americans during that time, along with the continuing problems with that era. The next book I want to talk about is In the Neighborhood of True. This is by Susan Kaplan Carlton. It's another young adult novel, and it takes place in 1950s Atlanta. Ruth and her mother are just moving from New York City to Atlanta, and it's a bit of a shift for Ruth. She's having a lot of identity issues while figuring out how to live in her new Christian pastel high school. She can't be Jewish and popular at the same time, so she has to choose between one or the other. She's also starting to fall for two different guys. One is a charming boy who goes to her high school, and the other is a serious, social justice-minded boy that she met at synagogue. When a violent hate crime makes Ruth question the life she is living, she has to decide whether to remain under the radar or stand up for what she believes in. The next book is Sorry Not Sorry. This is by Jamie Reed, and it's another young adult novel, and it came out in February of this year. It's about Elisa and Janelle, And Elisa has recently started hanging out with the Shallow girls. Her and Janelle used to be best friends, but they've had a falling out because Janelle is more interested in what's happening in the community and helping those around her. But Elisa's diabetes have become life-threatening, and she needs a kidney transplant, and the only person able to give it to her happens to be her former best friend, Janelle. The last book I'm going to talk about is The Moon Within by Ada Salazar. Ada is a debut author, and this book came out in February of this year. This is a middle grade novel in verse, and I love a novel in verse. They're great for reluctant readers. I would say it is like a modern, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. It's about Sally Rivera, and Sally is going through a time in her life when her body is changing and she is starting to change. She has her first crush on a boy, and her best friend is beginning to explore gender fluidity. Sally doesn't want to participate in a moon ceremony, which is an ancestral Mexican ritual that her mom is coordinating in celebration of her first period. So this book is about Sally trying to find her own voice while also being respectful of her mom's traditions. Now I'm going to hand it over to Liz to talk about her picks.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So my first title that I'd like to talk about is Mango Moon, which was written by Diane DeAnda and illustrated by Sue Cornelison. It's a picture book. It features a young girl who's struggling with the deportation and subsequent absence of her father. It's a forthcoming title. It'll be out April 1st, and it's very timely, and I figured it would be a good addition to this. In lighter fare, moving on, Weirdo and Even Weirder are two novels by Australian-Vietnamese comedian An Do. These are really good third grade to middle grade novels for reluctant readers. They're very graphic. They're very, very funny. An Do's own nickname growing up was Weir because of his last name. And these books are wildly popular in Australia. They've been in publication for several years now, which are a lot of the accounts I work with, and they are extremely popular. It's a no-brainer. They've sold over 1.5 million books in Australia. It fits right in with The Wimpy Kid and Big Nate, and it's full of universal stories and themes like having a goofy family or how difficult it is to fit in. And then lastly, the book I want to talk about is The Disasters by M.K. England. This is a debut book about 4 students who flunk out of an elite space academy, and they are witness to and then subsequently blamed for a heinous crime and end up on the run. And there's a heist in the middle of that as well. It's very funny. It's a really good read for people who enjoyed the quote-unquote space opera story and buddy comedy of Guardians of the Galaxy. And it's written by an LGBT author. And it's one of those that it's another one of those things where you just don't see a lot of those, so I wanted to point that one out. Okay, so politics have been at the forefront of many people's minds in the past several years, and with the upcoming presidential election, current trade wars, Brexit looming, and even the unrest in Venezuela, they're likely to stay. Many students are probably hearing more and more political talk at home, in the news, and of course on social media. This past fall, Education Week cited a study in which counselors at 52% of the nation's high schools reported an increase in social activism interest. Though this topic has been trending for several years now, we think it will stay and it will likely increase throughout the coming years. And so we'll start talking about some books. First, I'd like to talk about Kara Niergen's Youth Revolution. This author is a high school student from South Africa who overcame major health issues and long-term hospitalization and went on to win the 2016 International Google Science Fair. If you're curious, her topic was about fighting drought and conserving rainwater with fruit, particularly orange peels and avocados. Coming next up, We Are Displaced. It's edited by Malala. Who can say no to Malala? It's a collection of nonfiction stories from refugee and displaced girls around the world. They make a global crisis very personal, and it's full of themes of survival and social activism. If Malala is required reading at your school, this is a great follow-up title for students who might want to read beyond that assignment. And finally, Unprecedented by Martha Brokenbrow. It's a YA nonfiction novel, and of course a biography by President Trump, if you can't tell by the cover. It's won SLJ, Kirkus, Booklist, and PW starred reviews. It has been called quite provocative, but also has been called thoroughly researched. Though the book contains some helpful images, the audiobook has been proven to be extremely popular in our corner of the world and far outpaces the usage that the ebook has. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't touch on Parkland by David Cullen that just came out, last week, I think? Of course, it's a nonfiction novel. It's also already earned Kirkus Booklist and PW starred reviews. And it not only touches on the tragedy of Parkland, but then goes on to explore the social activism and the movement started by the students of Parkland.
Okay, I'm going to talk about a picture book, actually, What Would You Do with a Voice Like That by Chris Barton. It's a picture book about Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who was a lawyer, orator, educator, and politician at a time when few African American women had a voice in politics. She also was the speaker at my own graduation, and she was wonderful. For teens, there are a couple books. Be the Change the Future is in Your Hands. It's YA nonfiction, and it's a guidebook that inspires civic action by encouraging teens to organize events, fundraise, and protest for change in their communities. The other book, How I Resist, Activism and Hope for a New Generation by Maureen Johnson, is a collection of essays, songs, and examples of activism compiled from YA authors that offers hope and support into today's political climate. Both of those titles are good choices for reluctant readers or class discussions about activism. The final book that I'm going to discuss was one of my favorites. It's The 57 Bus by Dashka Slater. It's the true story of a hate crime on a bus in Oakland, California, where an African-American teen boy lights the skirt of a white gender-conforming teen on fire while they were sleeping. The book follows the teens through the crime, the trial, and the subsequent jail time that results. It's an informative discussion about identity and a realistic look into the prison system. While this book is about social justice, it is also a great book to promote empathy, so you could use it across a bunch of different units. And now I'll pass it off to Kristen.
The book I want to start talking about is Watch Us Rise by best-selling and award-winning author Renee Watson and poet Ellen Hagen. This is a young adult novel, and it's about Jasmine and Chelsea, who decide that this year at their New York City high school, they're going to start a women's rights club. They decide to do this by posting online, posting their poems, videos, and Jasmine's responses to microaggressions she experiences every day. The problem is that anything that goes online starts to get trolled, and so all of their comments start getting trolled, and when things continue to escalate, their principal decides he's going to shut the club down. But they have to decide if it's worth the risk so that their voices can be heard, and they decide that this club is something that's worth fighting for. I think this book is a really great book as far as the Me Too movement goes and talking about finding your own space, and especially when it comes to kind of high school and forming clubs, I think this would be a really great one for anyone who's looking to form some sort of a women's rights club or look deeper into those issues. The next book I want to talk about is The Art of Breaking Things by Laura Sibson. This comes out in June. It's in the vein of Lori Halls Anderson's Speak book. And it's the story of Skye, who's trying to finish out high school one party at a time, until her mom reignites her relationship with an ex-boyfriend who betrayed Skye's trust when she was too young to understand what was going on. She's kept it a secret for this many years, but now with her little sister in the picture, she thinks that she has to come out and find the courage to step forward and tell the world what happened to her. Again, another really great book when it comes to the Me Too movement and coming out and telling your own truth. The last book I want to talk about is The Tree and Me by Deborah Zemke. This comes out in May, and it happens to be book 4 in the Bay Garcia series. So if your students or kids really love this book, there are 3 more that they can read. It's reminiscent of the Amelia's Notebook books, which I loved when I was a girl. So it's a combination of diary entries along with cartoons in the margins and on the pages. It's really fun to read and really easy to read. Bay's classroom comes together to try and stop the beautiful oak tree that's on their school lawn from being cut down. And I think this is a great book to talk about conservation, green spaces, and another one for those younger readers for standing up for what you believe in. All right, and the next we want to talk about is choose kindness. It's not a new concept, as I'm sure we've all been taught the golden rule to treat others the way that you want to be treated. But there's a renewed focus on kindness, mindfulness, mental and emotional health, and putting an end to bullying. The book Wonder by R.J. Palacio has started movements and discussions in the classroom and outside of it about physical, mental, and emotional differences in children, how kids can be inclusive, become allies, and spread awareness about disabilities in the hope of inspiring empathy. Nebraska schools adopted Be Kind as a mission for their students, staff, and communities this year, and they've been spreading kindness and sharing their stories since the inception. The kindness movement is about more than just being nice to one another. It's about self-care and mindfulness, so kids can learn to empathize with one another, and so that they can understand that just because their classmates may be different from them, it doesn't mean they aren't experiencing similar emotions, situations, and interests. Are any of you using mindfulness or kindness training in your classroom or library? Many of the books that follow concentrate on showing kindness, sharing, being bullied, and mental and emotional health. Even without full-on training, the books we are presenting are a great way to start a conversation and to open up for students to talk to one another. The first book I want to talk about is All's Fair in Middle School by Victoria Jameson. This is a middle grade comic, and Victoria is also the author of Roller Girls, which came out a few years ago and is one of my absolute favorite middle grade novels. And again, like I said, this is also a graphic novel. It came out in 2017, so it's a little bit older, and you should be able to find it pretty easily. It has an SLJ, Kirkus, and Publishers Weekly starred review, and it is about Effie, who's a middle schooler. She has been homeschooled her entire life, but she's decided come middle school, she wants to go to public school with the rest of the kids. Her family happens to work at a Renaissance fair, and that makes Effie a little bit different. She loves life at the Renaissance fair, but she also wants to fit in at school, and she goes about it in some of the wrong ways. She finds out that the best way to feel like the best version of yourself is to show kindness and be authentic. On top of that, this is a really fun look at life working at a Renaissance fair and what it was like back then. The next book I want to talk about is You Don't Know Everything, Jilly P. by Alex Gino. Alex Gino was the author of George, which came out a few years ago. This book itself has a Publishers Weekly starred review, and again, it's middle grade fiction, and it came out in September of 2018. Jilly's baby sister just happened to be born, and Jilly couldn't be more excited. She's excited to teach her how to cook, to teach her about her favorite books, and just to show her the ways of the world. But it turns out that Jilly's sister was born deaf, and Jilly realizes she has a lot to learn. That's when she meets Derek, who happens to be a Black ASL user. And while she's trying to learn more about the ASL and deaf community, she makes a lot of mistakes while trying to ask him about being deaf. She realizes she's the one who needs to do better and work a little bit harder to be an ally for Derek and for her sister. This is a great book to talk about the ASL community and also to talk to kids about the right way to approach certain topics, and that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're doing it in the right way. The next book I want to briefly touch on is A Monster Like Me by Wendy S. Swore. This came out in March, and it's middle grade fiction, it's coming out in March. And it's about Sophie, who knows that monsters exist because her big book of monsters outlines all of them. She knows that goblins, dragons, and trolls may not always look like goblins, dragons, and trolls. Instead, they might look like your teacher or the bully in your class. But she is convinced that she too happens to be a monster because of the monster mark on her face, otherwise known as a blood tumor. If her mom finds out she's really a monster, will her mom leave Sophie like her dad did? This is a book with a character who has more to offer than meets the eye and reminds readers that no matter what a person looks like, they still feel and are worthy of love and respect. The last book I have is When Sadness is at Your Door by Eva Eland. This is a picture book, and it came out in January of this year. It had starred reviews from Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, and also it was an Indie's Next Pick. This is about confronting sadness and acknowledging it. The little boy in this book welcomes sadness into his life, and instead of just pushing it around and trying to get it out, he says, come on in, and he tries to find things that him and sadness enjoy doing together. It's a great book for mindfulness for kids, and it's a great way to start discussion about how kids deal with sadness and other large emotions like that.
Okay. So this is Liz, and I'm going to first talk about Through the Elephant's Door, which is a picture book that is from by Helen DeBlois, and sorry, it's a slaughter of her name, and illustrated by Franz Kormer. It's coming out soon in April of 2019, and it's a very cute story about a young boy and his friend, an elephant, who want to go to the art museum and see some beautiful art, but there's a very, very suspicious security guard who doesn't think that they'll be able to do it without breaking anything. It's a sweet story with a little bit of adventure, and it highlights an issue that that some people witness and or are a situation that people are constantly in a way that's cute and funny and not particularly preachy, and it also kind of highlights how to be a good ally. Secondly, The Boy at the Back of the Class by Anjali Q. Ralph. This one isn't coming out until August of this year. It's a middle grade fiction book about a new boy in class who's a Syrian refugee. And when his class finds out about this, they band together to bring the rest of his family to London so that he can see them and be with them. It was originally published in the UK. It's been out for a couple of months there. And this title has already appeared on several award shortlists, including the CILIP Carnegie and Blue Peter Awards. It's also a really good book about being an ally as well. And then finally, When the Ground is Hard by Mala Nunn is a YA fiction book. After being suddenly dumped by her best friend, Adelaide finds herself rooming with a school pariah at their Swahili boarding school. At its core, the story is actually a murder mystery, but it touches on themes of bullying, friendship, race, and class. And that one will be coming out in June of 2019 this year.
Okay, this is Sarah. I'm going to talk about just 3 of my books that are at different reading levels. The first one is a picture book called All Are Welcome that's come out recently. It's by Alexandra Penfold and Suzanne Kaufman. It tells the story of an inclusive city school where all are indeed welcome. There are hijabs, yarmulkes, and baseball caps depicted in the colorful, inclusive panels. It shows a school community gathering to celebrate the Lunar New Year. It's just beautiful visually and tells the message through the illustrations. The other book that I want to talk about is Wish Tree by award-winning Katherine Applegate, who wrote the one and only Ivan. It's middle grade fiction. It's told from the point of view of Red, the neighborhood oak tree, who witnesses an incident of hatred that's directed at a Muslim family who's recently moved onto his street. It's an affirming story of friendship and community, both between the humans who live on the street and the animals who make their home in the tree. It would be a great read aloud for a classroom, and it would spark discussion about tolerance and community. For anyone who's read and loved Wonder, this is a good book that preaches the same messages. The last book that I'm going to talk about is a YA fiction. It's called A Step Toward Falling by Cammie McGovern. Two teens witness a fellow student with developmental disabilities being attacked, and they do nothing to help her. Because of their inactions, the students are required to do community service at a center for disabled people. Told in alternating voices, the teens develop a deeper empathy for people with disabilities and learn from their mistakes. So it's a story of hope and learning. The other books that I chose were the Love by Matt de la Pena, the picture book that's a celebration of love in a child's life. It's beautiful. And El Defo by C.C. Bell, which is a mid-grade graphic novel. It's also an own voices book because the author has a hearing impairment, and it's a memoir of her growing up. Okay, the last trend that we're going to talk about today is gamification. Gaming is a trend that has crept into education and into reading with the use of badges and other rewards like we have in our Sora app for schools. Gaming promotes connectivity and student engagement, and it can motivate reluctant readers and learners. It promotes digital citizenship because there's a real community, and through gaming, students can take on alternative selves and do identity work. In games, students have the freedom to fail with no repercussions, so they can try on different paths or outcomes. So the books that I'm going to focus on are all fiction. The first one is a YA graphic novel called In Real Life by Cory Doctorow. In it, girl gamer Anda is invited to play in an all-female gamer group in an MMORPG. No, I am not a gamer. It's a multiplayer, real-life role-playing game called Course Gold that teaches her about first-world consumption, enlightens her of the dangers of online gaming, and addresses misogyny in gaming. This is a real girl power book. Author Cory Doctorow writes an eloquent introduction that highlights both the positive and the negative aspects of gaming. Common Sense Media says that it's okay for ages 12 and up. Ready Player One by Ernest Cline is adult fiction, but Common Sense Media says that this futuristic book about gaming is appropriate for ages 15 and up, even though it's an adult title. With the movie tie-in, this remains a wildly popular book with teens. Game Over Pete Watson by Joe Schreiber is mid-grade fiction. Gamer Pete Watson discovers that his dad is trapped inside a video game and he must rescue him. Will he be able to save the world from a cyber attack? This is really funny mid-grade fiction and would be really popular with the students. Playing Tyler by T.L. Costa is YA fiction. Debut author T.L. Costa tells a story with many talking points. Tyler is a teen with ADHD who is a talented gamer. His brother is in rehab. He is asked to test a video game that is more than it seems. It's a new take on the classic movie War Games for those of us old enough to remember it. And now I will hand it off to Kristen.
The first book I want to talk about is Girls Who Code by Stasia Deutsch and Reshma Sojani. This is for middle grade, and currently there are 4 books in this series, the first one having come out in 2017. This is basically a babysitter's club meets coding, and each book is told from a different friend's perspective. It's about 4 diverse middle school girls who are really excited to start this new year of school. One of the girls has decided that she has an app that she really can't wait to code, and she can't wait to join coding clubs so that she can bring her idea forward to everyone else and get started on it. But when she gets to coding club, some people have different ideas. Again, just a really, really cute novel and really great for getting kids into STEM, and also as we're trying to get more girls interested in technology and STEM careers, I think this is a really great book for that. The next book I want to push is How to Code a Sandcastle by Josh Funk. The author happens to be a software engineer, so he knows what he's talking about, And I feel like I'm cheating a little bit because this picture book is actually part of the Girls Who Code universe. So this is about Pearl, who has to use sequences, loops, and other basic coding techniques to tell Pascal, her robot, how to build a sandcastle. It's really cute. The drawings are really adorable, and it does a really good job of outlining the basics of coding. So this is a great starting point for any projects or programs on beginning programming for those younger readers. And now I'll give it over to Liz.
Thank you. Okay, so the first two books I want to talk about simultaneously are the Make Your Own Puzzle Script Games and Build Your Own Website. They're both by a publisher called No Start Press, and they're nonfiction books that teach adults and young people how to code. They're some of my favorites. Build Your Own Website is actually a graphic novel that teaches you how to build your own website. And though it is intended for adults, it's very, very accessible for teens, and most of their books are in the same vein. They also contain a lot of really great books for parents who want to teach their children how to code and need a little guide. And then next, I want to talk about the Chaos of Now, and I do have a note about this one. So I accidentally put in the UK cover. The American cover looks a little bit different. It's more red, and it has a lighter on it. But this is a young adult fiction novel. When Coding Whiz Eli is recruited by two students in his high school who are seeking revenge and social justice on school bullies, some of whom who caused their friend's public suicide on school grounds. It's a morally complex story that has themes dealing with the aftermath of tragedy, online privacy, cyberbullying, and, justice versus revenge. It's also notable that the story includes an esports competition, which is, a sport that is growing in popularity but necessarily hasn't been covered in YA literature that much. It's already earned SLJ and Kickstart reviews. And then finally, my last book is a bit of a stretch. It's The Infinite Lives of Maisie Day by Christopher Edge. It's a middle grade novel. And this is a story about a young girl who wakes up and her family is missing, and she has to visit different worlds and kind of explores the laws of the universe in order to find them. This book came out in the UK last year, and it has been pretty much nominated for all the awards. It's a book not necessarily much about coding, but it's very much a STEAM novel, and it deals with a lot of science information, particularly quantum physics, for middle graders. It's been shortlisted for the 2019 Leeds Book Award, the 2019 STEAM Children's Book Prize in the UK, and has been nominated for a 2019 CILIP Carnegie Medal. And then it'll be hitting the US in just a little bit in April of 2019. And that's all I have.
Do we want to take questions?
Okay, so I'm back. This is Susan. We have some time for Q&A, so for the people listening, if you have questions, just go ahead and type them in the Q&A box, and we should have some time to talk about them. So first, I want to, one of these questions has already been answered, but I had two questions that came up for the diversity and inclusion slide about age levels. So the first one is, what age level is in the neighborhood of true for, would you say?
That one, I'd say it's about 14 to 18 years old. So yeah, right in those high school years. And of course, any adult readers who would want to read it.
Yeah, like Susan. And then what about the disasters? The same question. What age group is that for?
That's definitely a YA novel. It's not too scandalous, but there is some cussing and things along those lines. So it depends on, how delicate your young adults are.
Right. Well, yes. So maybe possibly younger than 14, but mileage may vary, I guess. So while we're kind of on the diversity and inclusion slide, do you guys have any advice for incorporating these titles into the larger reading program?
I think one of the ways to do it is to go by cultural identities. So many of these represent different experiences both in the United States and abroad. I think they would be great extensions of units like that. I think there are a lot of discussions now about identities. That would be another way to pull this in. And there are so many different formats and age levels, too, that you could fit them. They tie in with the choose kind thing, too. There are so many overlaps with these topics. I think there are a lot of ways that you could introduce these.
Yeah, and I think there's some overlap with the politics, too, to a certain extent.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's going to lead me into my next question about the politics. Sometimes administrators get, I'm going to say nervous if a book is considered too liberal or too conservative, it has too strong of a point of view on one of those sides. Do you, can you suggest any of the books that you mentioned that have a more balanced view, or is that something folks should worry about, or?
I think, well, first of all, the middle grade novel or series of books I talked about, The Tree and Me by Deborah Zemke, the Bay Garcia series, is pretty much all the rest of the books in that are very, very easygoing about some pretty easy topics. That one isn't too political when we're getting into it, especially, for a younger aged audience. So that's an easy one for those younger kids. Do you guys have anything as far as high school or anything else?
The We Are Displaced book, those stories are very much just personal kind of memoir stories, so they aren't particularly political in any way. It's more about, I believe the goal of the book is more about gaining empathy than necessarily having an opinion on the global crisis. So that's a good one that's pretty neutral, because it's really about these, narratives of these young women.
And the Be the Change is a guidebook, so it's inspiring civic action and getting involved in your community, but doesn't necessarily have a point of view. So you can choose your issue, whether it's, the environment or whatever, and it will tell you how to organize events and fundraisers for whatever your issue is.
Cool. I haven't been getting a lot of questions, but a lot of compliments on the great books, and this one just came in from Grace Azolino that she is sort of psyched that a lot of the books that you've mentioned she already has, and so she's looking forward to looking at the rest of them. Anyway, thanks, Grace. So let's move on to the Choosing Kindness selections. Are any of these particularly good for preteen boys, 10 to 12-year-old boys?
I really love, Victoria Jameson does write female protagonists, but all they're in middle school. Effie, the main character, is a tomboy. She's interested in becoming a knight at her Renaissance fair, and so she does a lot of training for that. I think it's easy to tie that book in with a middle grade male population. Even though the protagonist is female, she does a lot of things that are considered prototypically more male. So I think that one's great for anyone.
And I feel like The Boy at the Back of the Class is a pretty good book for, the middle grade boys, maybe even a little bit younger, depending on, their reading skill level. But it's, it's a male protagonist, and it's very much about just family. It's not necessarily funny or gross, which I know are some of the most popular topics, but it's a good read.
And Wish Tree is about a blossoming friendship between a boy and a girl, and a step toward falling. There's a male football player and a female student, so both of them have alternating points of view, which is nice.
Cool. Sorry. So I'm just trying to read a question and talk at the same time. It's very hard. So I'm going to go back to politics for a second. We had a question for about this. This participant has some students who are interested in more politically conservative literature, and specifically about fostering conversation and acceptance of others' opinions. Do you have any suggestions from the books that you mentioned that might be good for this, or any suggestions for that?
That's a great question.
That is the question.
Yeah.
Right?
I
think the Civic one. Sorry, go ahead. I'm not. Why I'm answering the question? You answered the question.
I apologize. I don't have anything off the top of my head. I know that the president's biography, I don't think it's particularly popular with conservatives. From what I understand, it leans a little left. So I would not recommend that one, just so you know, to steer clear of that one. But nothing off the top of my head, right off my cuff or anything. Raph, I'm so sorry. Now I want to research this.
Whoever writes it will sell it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the books, maybe even in the Choose Kindness, if you're interested in teaching about listening and accepting other people's points of view, you might be able to find some good inspiration there too. So, yeah. All right, I've got another question for you. So, Read Across America Week is next week, and this person is wondering if you have any suggestions for more diverse books for a K through 4 school, so kind of the younger end of the spectrum.
Yeah. I'm trying to, right now I'm sitting here trying to look up the title. I am thinking of.
Well, we're all librarians, so we understand that when
you can't go wrong with Wish Tree.
True.
Mm-hmm.
I loved, Taye Diggs actually has a couple of picture books that I really loved. One of them is called Mixed Me, and it's just the main character's parents come from 2 different cultural backgrounds, and so it's about the main character accepting himself, who he is, what his hair looks like, what his skin looks like. It's just a really beautiful novel about acceptance and, really being proud of who you are and your different identities. So that's one that I would suggest to anyone.
One of the books that was on the slide that I didn't get to talk about was The Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus, and it's about a girl that doesn't have arms, and there's a sequel coming out too, but it's a book about making friends and overcoming differences, and it's also very funny. That's a great mid-grade book.
Love it. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm a big fan of that picture book that's been out for several years now. They All Saw a Cat.
Yeah.
Where it's just a cat walking around, and it's how the cat is perceived through all these different creatures and people. And I don't know, there's just something about that one that I always really love because it's whimsical and it's a little bit silly and it's about a cat.
But it definitely makes the point that everybody sees things differently and there are different perspectives. It's a gentle way to get that message across.
And my son really, really loves it. He loves cats right now.
So there you go.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say another one I would highly recommend. It's another comic for middle grade. It's The Cardboard Kingdom, and I believe, it's by Chad Fell. It is about a neighborhood of kids who, over their summer, they all come up with these different characters that they portray, and they make costumes, and they build these gigantic sets, And so each of the chapters is from a different child's perspective, and so it's a diverse neighborhood, and all of these kids are going through different experiences, either trying to be accepted by the other kids in the neighborhood or having family issues. It's just a really cute book. I really loved reading it, so that's another good one.
Awesome. And so for the gamification books, how do you think that these books can help improve circulation?
Because they're high interest.
Yeah.
Kids ask for them. Seriously, Ready Player One circulates like crazy. And when I was a public librarian, I couldn't keep any of the books that had anything to do with Minecraft or any of that on the shelves. They just circulated like crazy. And there are novels, series that have to do with gaming that the kids just devour.
Do you think that they're particularly appeal to reluctant readers or
I do.
just game people? Cool.
I think both, and they have high visuals, or they tend to in them, and the kids just love them.
And they're also kind of an easy gimme for students that don't necessarily like reading a lot of fiction. I know that it's hard to imagine that there are people out there like that, but there are who don't like fiction. So gamification is one of those easy grabs for students who are looking for something and they aren't necessarily interested in, a story per se.
Literature, yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think we have time for one more question, and this one hopefully will be fun for you. So if you had to choose a book per trend of the ones that you suggested, which one do you think is your fave? Can you even pick a favorite?
Trying to choose a favorite book is always the worst, but yeah. I guess we can do that. Do you guys want to go through own voices first?
Sure. Are we agreeing, or do we each get to pick? That's my question.
No, you each get to pick.
Okay. Woo. This is Kristen, and I would say that the one I would choose is This Time Will Be Different by Misa Seguira. I started reading this one this week. I really love the writing. I love the character, and I think it's a story, again, about Japanese internment that isn't always told, and that's something that, we haven't heard all that much about.
For me, I would probably pick Weirdo by Ando. He's just so funny. His stories are really goofy, and they're just universally great.
And I would choose New Kid by Jerry Craft. I think it's going to be on a lot of lists this year. It's awesome in audio. It's a full cast audio. And the graphic novel, his illustrations are just wonderful. There's just so much nuance in it. I think kids will like it, and I think adults should read it as well.
I also think the cover for This Time Will Be Different is absolutely beautiful, and as soon as any young adult sees it, it's going to fly off your shelf. So that always helps. Mm-hmm. As far as politics and social reform, I would probably choose Watch Us Rise by Renee Watson. Again, I just think it's a cool concept of these two girls who want to form this club and, the struggles they go through to try and get their voices heard.
For me, I would probably pick We Are Displaced. How can you say no to Malala? She's just so lovely.
And I would choose 57 Bus. It was one of my favorite audiobooks. The way she writes it, it's nonfiction that reads like fiction. It was engaging. It's a compelling story, and it was incredibly informative about the language around identity these days. I learned a lot.
And moving on to kindness, I'm having a hard time here choosing between All's Fair in Middle School and When Sadness is at Your Door. All's Fair in Middle School, again, for a middle grade audience, just really adorable, super fun, and a really great message about kindness. And then When Sadness is at Your Door, I just think is really unique. I don't think there are a lot of picture books about dealing with sadness and grief for this kind of audience that are out there. So those are my picks. Sorry, I couldn't choose one.
For me, I'm a sucker for an adorable picture book, so Through the Elephant's Door. The illustrations are sweet, and everyone loves elephants, and art museum. So it's an excellent combination.
I'm going to do the picture book thing too. As a former preschool teacher and youth services librarian who did 1 million story times, All Are Welcome gets the message across just with the pictures alone. And then gamification.
Oh, right, gamification. I would choose, this is Kristen, I would choose How to Code a Sandcastle. I thought it was really fun. I thought that, it's fiction and nonfiction put together, so it's just a great combination and a really easy way to spell out how to do some basic coding.
For me, I'll choose The Chaos of Now by Erin Lange. I really love stories that are kind of ambiguous when it comes to morality, so that it kind of leaves the reader thinking about what's right, what's wrong, and it's one of those novels that'll stick with you for a couple of days, and that's probably why I pick it. Those are my favorites personally. I love a good book that I realize I'm thinking about a month or a week or whenever later.
And I would choose In Real Life. I think it's going to fly off the shelves. The illustrations are amazing. You go between the gaming world and the real world. She has issues with her parents being too strict, but she learns that she actually has it pretty good compared to people in other countries who are working in horrible working conditions. So it's a real eye-opener, and that's why In Real Life. And he gets his message across, not so subtly, but I really enjoyed the book.
Okay.
All right. So did you guys want to talk about how folks can stay connected to you? Or is this slide enough information?
Yeah, you can find OverDrive on any social media. Our phone number is down there. If you want, you can go to overdrive.com/schools. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. We also have a few different Instagrams. And if you are interested in any more book recommendations, I'd highly suggest finding our podcast called Professional Book Nerds. It's really fun, so that's a great one to find as well on any source you find your podcast.
And there'll be a link to all the titles that we talked about.
Awesome. All right. So thank you again to Kristen, Sarah, and Liz. Sure, everyone's to-be-read pile has just grown exponentially. All right. So tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing a link to today's slide presentation and a link to the certificate of completion. You'll also receive a notice when the video archive of today's webinar is posted at www.booklistonline.com/webinars. Please visit that same URL to learn more about Booklist webinars, view an archive of past webinars, or register for our upcoming webinars, like the ones you see here. Oh gosh. Okay, if you haven't already, be sure to check out the Booklist Reader, where Booklist editors and contributors are posting weekly about all things books and library land. And Booklist has a digital edition of the magazine, which you can connect to your subscription online. This format pairs the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access, and it's included free with all Booklist subscriptions. Not yet a subscriber? Take advantage of the special webinar offer to get print, online, digital, and archive access to Booklist for only $99. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. One more thank you to our panelists, as well as our sponsor, OverDrive Education. This concludes today's webinar.